The next item of business is a debate on motion 24396 in the name of Angela Constance on National Mission to Reduce Drug Deaths and Harms. Can I invite those members who wish to speak in the debate to press their request to speak buttons, and if they're remote, please put R in the chat function. And I call on Angela Constance to speak to and move the motion. Minister, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Following the First Minister's announcement in January of a national mission to both save and improve lives, I am pleased that we have managed to secure time for this very important debate before the end of this current parliamentary session to update Parliament on the work that has been pursued to address rising drug-related deaths, Scotland's other public health emergency and Scotland's national shame. I have spent much of my first few months in post meeting as many people with lived and living experience as possible, hearing firsthand what they think my priorities should be. And I am now, more than ever, convinced that we need to be informed by those who have the greatest understanding and the greatest experience of the current system in everything we do. And many discussions have really stuck with me, like the group of women I recently met who still have drug dependency, but who are managing to engage with treatment services. And the message which came through from that great group was one of hopelessness. They felt that they had been forgotten about, that their lives didn't matter. And while this is difficult to hear, it is vital that we respond in a way which can restore hope to those who most need it, to show that their lives do indeed matter and that they are valued as our fellow citizens. To help with that, I'm going to make sure people are more involved in the decisions that affect them, learning from what has worked well in other areas, such as the Early Years Collaborative and Social Security Experience panels. I will ensure that we have local panels of lived and living experienced people involved in all local decision making, and that we have a national forum or collaborative in place to better inform our national mission. Recovery communities have provided a voice for lived experience and are an effective movement for change, and they can be assured of this government's continued support and funding. We need to also bring together the voices of living experience too, those who are still using substances, to help redesign our services, to reach out and to support more people into treatment. We know treatment has a protective factor and that it helps keep people alive. Certainly.
Neil Findlay.
In appointing people to these panels and in whatever forums, it's very important that we don't just tick a tokenistic box and that we have people in there who are willing to challenge awkward voices and people who are going to be very prickly, because ticking the box that says we've got someone with lived experience does not satisfy everyone.
Minister. Presiding Officer, I very much appreciate that point made by Mr Findlay, and he may not know this, but I, for one, appreciate challenging and prickly voices too, and I'm determined to hear from the widest range of voices and the widest range of views. And to do this, we will bring together existing organisations to provide that voice of lived and living experience for the first time. And this, I believe, marks a significant new approach in how we reach those in need and deliver for them. Lived and living experience will underpin every action we take. But alongside this, and in this year ahead, we will focus on what we already know works. We know that getting more people into treatment or recovery faster, and that having a wider range of services available in every part of the country will save lives. For some people, the right treatment will be residential rehabilitation. In the last 2 months, an additional £3 million was allocated to alcohol and drug partnerships to immediately increase and improve access to treatment, particularly residential rehabilitation. And information from alcohol and drug partnerships on how this money was allocated is being published this week, and it will show that it has already led to around 150 additional residential placements being funded, with significant investment in aftercare. But there is still more to do to meet people where they are, to provide services which can offer treatment on the same day, and treatment that works for individuals and not against them. We need no or low barriers to care and treatment. And we know that there are alternatives to methadone which can help save lives. Long-lasting buprenorphine can offer some people a better quality of life and protect them from overdose. This has now been used in prisons for almost a year and has been piloted in some areas in the wider community. And we will work now with our partners to make this more widely available. We know that the Glasgow Heroin Assisted Treatment Service has also shown real success. With additional investment in the next financial year, we will build on that service to make this life-saving treatment more widely available across the country. Frontline services deliver vital treatment to save lives, and we will increase funding to help them increase their capacity and also to support their workforce. Crucially, we also know that outreach services, community services and grassroots organisations are often more able to reach people that statutory services can struggle to contact. And we will increase funding to community and grassroots organisations to help more people into treatment faster. And going forward, the new Medication-Assisted Treatment, or MAT standards, will be the linchpin in how treatment is offered. And following consultation, these standards will be published in May. They will begin changing in the way that individuals can access and receive support, particularly as they will help ensure more people will be receiving same-day treatment. And they will reinforce a rights-based approach by ensuring individuals have choice in their treatment and are empowered to access the right support for where they are in their own recovery journey. And we will be ensuring that these standards are fully embedded across the country by April 2022 and to have non-fatal overdose pathways in place in all areas. The Drugs Deaths Task Force has also been instrumental in driving a number of projects. It focuses on the wider distribution of life-saving naloxone kits and has led to both the Scottish Ambulance Service and Police Scotland now running programmes which allow staff to use and distribute kits. A peer-to-peer supply programme is also underway, ensuring that more kits are in the hands of those who need them. Already, we know that the kits distributed by the ambulance service have helped to save lives, certainly.
Jenny Mara.
I thank the Minister for giving way. The plan sounds very good, especially on-day treatment, but it does sound light years away from where we are today. How is the Minister going to ensure that statutory services actually deliver her plan?
Minister.
Well, I will come on to more detail about that in terms of how the Government will lead this at a national level and also about how funding will be used as a lever for change. Presiding Officer, going back to the naloxone training, it was only last week a police officer who was able to use their kit on someone who had had an overdose just after 2 hours of being trained, thus helping to keep this person alive until paramedics arrived. It is vital that we continue to support and scale up these initiatives, which will make a tangible difference. But, Presiding Officer, we will also continue to push for some of those options currently unavailable to us. We know overdose prevention facilities are an effective and evidence-led option in our fight to save lives, and I'm determined to overcome the legal barriers that currently restrict us from establishing these facilities in Scotland, and I have a team of officials working to pull together expertise and options. Presiding Officer, the priority for the national mission is to embed our emergency work to save lives with the wider work to improve lives. Problem drug use is the symptom of much bigger issues. The complex problems people face must be recognised and tackled. For instance, we know at least half of all people with problem drug use are likely to have mental health problems. We need to do more to improve integration between mental health and addiction recovery services. All of the actions and work I have outlined today will be underpinned by strong leadership, and they need to work across government. It is my job as Minister for Drugs Policy to join the dots and to drive delivery to the very highest of standards. Nothing less will be acceptable. And to that end, I will create a new ministerial implementation group This will bring together relevant ministers from portfolios such as mental health, housing, justice and children and families, alongside senior representatives from organisations that deliver our strategies and services. Because we need to hold one another to account for progress, and I am working urgently to establish relevant treatment targets which will show the scale of our ambition, and will engage with frontline staff and those with lived experience in that regard too. I will also continue to work closely with our trusted third sector partners whose experience of delivering services on the front line is invaluable. To progress this work and to reduce deaths and to improve lives, we have committed, as Parliament knows, an additional £50 million per year for the next 5 years. And I am announcing today 4 new funds totalling £18 million, which will be opened by May 2021 to improve and accelerate treatment and recovery. These funds will be in place for the next 5 years to allow services to plan for the future. These will also come with built-in support to help people of all backgrounds and levels of expertise apply for funding. And for lower funding levels, there will be less of a burden in the application process. The first 2 funds build on the ones I announced in February. I'm really... Okay?
Brian Whittle.
I'm very grateful for the Minister for giving way. I think the Minister knows my passion for to ensure that the third sector are properly funded. I wonder if she could tell me how, or tell them how that funding, you can ensure that funding gets to the front line and to the third sector, because they will be crucial in the development of your plan.
Minister.
Thank you, President Officer. And yes, indeed, Mr Whittle, that is of vital importance, and that is why we will have specific funds that are available only to third sector and grassroots organisation. So the first 2 funds that I'm going to announce build on the ones that I announced in February. The first one is the Communities Fund. It will be relaunched with easier access criteria. It will be for community-based projects and designed to help support people to access treatment and support communities to offer wraparound support for people in need as a result of drug harems. There will be £5 million available in 21-22. The Service Improvement Fund, another £5 million, will be available to improve treatment and recovery services, including aftercare, and increase outreach activity. This fund will include dedicated support for initiatives which improve services for women and younger people. There are too few services for these particular groups. I'm also setting up a Children and Families Fund of £3 million to help families who face problems in supporting a relative through treatment. This funding will help families provide support to their loved ones who need care for problematic drug use. Support from their families is one of the most important things which people often need, and this fund will help services to become more family aware and to help reduce the numbers of women who have to worry about losing links to their children because they're accessing treatment. And finally, I will establish a Recovery and Rehabilitation Fund of £5 million to provide additional residential rehabilitation capacity and to support people financially through residential rehabilitation. We know that because of the lack of clarity in housing benefit guidance, there are some local authorities who do not allow people to retain tenancies funded by housing benefit while they are in rehabilitation. We cannot ask people to make impossible choices between their tenancy and their recovery journey. So this fund will help ensure that this no longer happens. Presiding Officer, as I said in my last speech to Chamber, we know that there isn't just one solution to this crisis. There are many. And everything we do and say must lead to a better informed debate. A better informed debate that knocks down stigma, that knocks down obstacles to change and knocks down the barriers to treatment and support. And within and out with this Parliament, we need to find better ways to work together to deliver on that national mission to save and to improve lives. Presiding Officer, I move the motion in my name and I look forward to listening to members' contributions this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I would call Donald Cameron to speak to and move Amendment 24396.1 on behalf of the Conservatives. Mr Cameron, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I am Firstly, would I like to move the amendment in the name of Brian Whittle, which I have supported and signed. I'm grateful to Open for the Scottish Conservatives on this very important issue, and can I again welcome Angela Constance to her role as Minister for Drugs Policy. I welcome the engagement that she has had with opposition parties, and I acknowledge her meeting with me individually. The Scottish Conservatives look forward to working with all stakeholders as we continue to address this crisis. And it's particularly poignant that this subject matter probably marks my last contribution of this session of Parliament, as my very first question to the First Minister back in October 2016 was on the issue of drug-related hospitalisations. At that point, the data showed acute general admissions increasing, and of those patients admitted, about half of them lived in 20% most deprived areas of Scotland. Fast forward to 2021, and the latest data shows that the number of patients in hospital with a drug-related condition sits at a 20-year high. To put that into perspective, in 1998-99, the number of people hospitalised with a drug-related condition was 79 per 100,000. In 2018-19, most recent data available, it sits at 192 per 100,000. That is a staggering increase, and it shows that governments of all political stripes have not only comprehensively failed to address a high number of drug-related conditions, but that since devolution, the problem has worsened. Today, we come here to debate and discuss the way forward to not only reduce drug hospitalisations, but to reduce the number of drug deaths in Scotland. And I note that the Scottish Government has acknowledged in its motion that the high number of drug deaths in Scotland is a mark of shame on the nation, and that it is a public health emergency requiring partnership working and concerted action at all levels of public life. I couldn't agree more. Indeed, the number of drug deaths has increased from 455 recorded in 2007 when the SNP government first took office, and it now sits at 1,264 as of 2019. Let me be clear, Deputy Presiding Officer. Every death as a result of drugs is a tragedy. Every death as a result of drugs is a lost family member. Every death as a result of drugs is a loss to society. And while I don't want to make too many political points during this debate, it cannot be overlooked that this is a problem which has occurred mainly under the current government's watch. In the year of the highest number of drug deaths in the devolution era, we did see under-resourced rehabilitation services, long waiting lists for such services, and a failure of public policy to get to grips with this issue. In 2019-20, the Scottish Government only funded 13% of residential rehab places in Scotland, with the rest supported by alcohol and drug partnerships, self-funding insurance, and through other means. The government's own report on residential rehabilitation in Scotland stated that the majority of facilities have a waiting list for their services, ranging from a few days to a year. And it also stated that residential rehabilitation providers found navigating ADP funding pathways difficult and took a long time. And over a year after the former Minister for Public Health announced the creation of a drug death task force, the chief executive of the campaign group Favour said that the drug death task force insists on pursuing the same failed options that got us into this mess. We need the UK government to come to the table to discuss sensible solutions, and we need the Scottish government to start properly funding rehabilitation and recovery programmes. So the Scottish Conservatives welcome the commitment from the government to invest £20 million of funding per year for rehab facilities, something that we had long been calling for with the support of groups such as Favour. We equally agree that more funding is required across a range of areas to prevent drug use, provide more effective treatments and save more lives. And I welcome that in the government's motion too. The UK Home Office has also called for the widening of medications such as naloxone, which is used to treat overdoses of methadone, morphine and fentanyl. And I know that this call has been made by the task force as well. With all that said, we believe that we need to go further and we must explore and investigate other forms of treatment, including non-pharmaceutical and abstinence-based treatments. And we also believe that we should be open-minded about treatments that have been seen to be effective in other countries that may not be available in Scotland, for example, neuroelectric therapy. We also need to radically approach how we talk about drugs with young people and children so that we can tackle early drug use. I recently spoke to one Scottish business who provide interactive drug smell education cards to police forces across England and have been eager to pilot these in Scotland too. It's clear that we need to be more broad-minded in our approach, given that current initiatives are simply not having the desired outcome. It's also evident that where possible, we need to have a UK-wide approach on tackling the supply of drugs coming into the country, and more needs to be invested in policing so we can properly tackle the source of drug consumption. And I welcome the fact that last year at the UK-wide Drugs Death Summit in Glasgow, the UK government brought together drug recovery experts, health professionals, government ministers, senior police officers from across the UK with the intention of boosting collaboration between all levels of government. We need more of that cross-government collaboration, not less. So I hope the Scottish Government reconsiders whether it will sign up to Project ADDA, the UK-wide initiative to fund extra resources to law enforcement to dismantle organised criminal gangs and tackle the supply of drugs, while also investing money into drug treatment and recovery programmes. And I hope the Scottish Government will join the scheme as part of its wider domestic measures to tackle the drugs crisis. As well as reducing drug deaths in Scotland, we also need to look at how we reduce drug-related harms too. According to the Hepatitis C Trust, 21,000 Scots are estimated to be chronically infected with hepatitis C, and around 90% of new hepatitis C infections occur through sharing contaminated drug-injecting equipment. This is also partly responsible for the transmission of other blood-borne viruses. Again, we believe that early interventions can reduce transmission, and it is important that the Scottish Government works closely with charities like the Hepatitis C Trust when developing effective policy. Deputy Presiding Officer, as I come to a conclusion, this is a vital debate, and it is one that must continue into the next session of Parliament. As Neil Findlay said, we do need voices that are robust and challenging when it comes to lived experience rather than those that just tick boxes. Voices like Neil Findlay's, someone who has always challenged orthodoxy and whose own voice will be much missed in this chamber. There are no short-term solutions to the drugs crisis that is gripping Scotland, and we must work collectively as one Parliament to tackle this problem head-on and save lives. It's clear we need greater investment in prevention and treatment, and we need braver and bolder policy that tackles the core causes of drug use. Politicians across the spectrum have collectively failed to meet this challenge up until now, as the figures so starkly show, but we have an opportunity to steer Scotland in a new direction. Let's grasp that opportunity so that in another 20 years' time, we can look back and say that we all started this conversation, took the action, and led Scotland out of this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Cameron. Now calling James Kelly to speak to and move Amendment 24396.3 on behalf of Labour. Mr Kelly, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment in my name. There's no doubt that 1,264 deaths in the last reported year, that the scale of this crisis is devastating. The government are right to acknowledge in their motion that it's a mark of shame. Indeed, it's a national disgrace, and it's a failure of the devolution era across a number of administrations, not just the current administration. And I think what those victims' families and those who are affected by the drugs crisis are looking for from politicians is not warm words and platitudes, but frank speaking and practical solutions. From my point of view, I acknowledge that as just a spokesperson for Scottish Labour back in 2009, I endorsed and supported the road to recovery that the government brought forward. Indeed, it was supported across the Parliament. Sadly, that approach failed, and since then we've moved on to an approach that's more focused on health issues, health treatment of drug issues. In terms of the Scottish Labour amendment, what we have done is we've tried to outline some practical steps that could be taken to address the crisis and also to help those who are vulnerable drug users. I note what the Minister says about safe consumption rooms, and I think that's positive in terms of exploring a way forward. The reality is, without safe consumption rooms, those taking drugs take to the streets, will take to vulnerable locations, they will use unsafe equipment, they will be exposed to potential overdose, and that's a dangerous situation. Contrast that with a safe facility, which is clean, which is monitored, and where that facility can receive appropriate counselling. Some of the debates around this in recent years have got dogged down on constitutional issues. I think there's got to be a will there on all sides to provide solutions to this so that we can take it forward and we can provide these facilities which ultimately save lives. The approach that has developed in recent years has been a health one, and that's correct. However, I think it should be acknowledged that there are issues with how vulnerable drug users are treated in the criminal justice system. I do think that the focus is all wrong. Someone who's vulnerable and a drug user, they don't need an appearance before a sheriff in a court. They need help from dedicated NHS professional. And I think that the resources of and the policies of the prosecution service need to be examined to ensure that they're not taking people through the criminal justice system when it's going to adversely affect their life and their potential outcomes. I don't believe that approach should exempt drug dealers. I think drug dealers keep misery on communities and have driven a lot of what we've seen. And I think they should continue to be pursued rigorously by the police and the prosecutors. I welcome what the Minister has announced in terms of funding for rehabilitation and treatment. And I think that's absolutely essential. And we've got to look to extend things like drug treatment and testing orders and appropriate support for rehabilitation and aftercare services. I also think it's important to give proper financial and practical support to same-day prescribing medical assisted therapies so that those in need of these therapies can get them immediately and start to try and get the benefits from it. And as the Minister said, more than half of drug users suffer from mental health, so there needs to be a stronger tie-up there between mental health and those who suffer from substance abuse. I think the other important point that I would make is that in terms of how this all moves forward in relation to not just development of policies but implementation. The Minister said that there's now going to be a kind of cross-cutting approach in terms of different portfolios involved. But I think it's absolutely essential, as Neil Findlay acknowledged, that those with proper experience and those who will ask tough questions are also involved. There's a lot of expertise there. I think there are also issues around the timescale of this. I think one of the issues in recent years has been that the government has been too slow to react. There's a lot of good in the Minister's announcement. However, we need to pace. We need to take these issues forward with speed. On the Labour side, both Neil Findlay and Jenny Mara will make their final contributions today. After 10 years as MSPs, they have contributed significantly to the Parliament on a range of issues, but they've both been powerful voices in the drugs debate. And although this is our final debate, I'm sure they will continue to contribute on this issue, and indeed the government would do well to draw on their expertise. So in moving forward, Deputy Presiding Officer, I think it's absolutely essential that we have practical solutions. We've got funding, and we heard some of that today, but we also need timelines as to how this will be taken forward. Clearly, the scale of the crisis is something that has affected so many, and the government and the Parliament have let so many down. So we need urgent action on it, and I welcome the fact that there's support for that across all parties.
Thank you very much, Mr Kelly. And I call on Liam MacArthur to speak to move Amendment 24396.2 on behalf of the Liberal Democrats. Mr MacArthur, please.
Thanks, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I start where James Kelly concluded and acknowledge the contribution that both Jenny Mara and Neil Findlay have made to this debate, I very much look forward to hearing their contributions in due course. As James Kelly's amendment reminds us, though, we entered this Parliament with a 22% cut in drug and alcohol partnership budgets. Services and expertise that people relied upon were surrendered. The narrative and perspective at the outset of this Parliament was a damaging one too. There was a fatalism. It was often said that these were not well people. It was often said deaths were the legacy of ageing drug users, as though there was nothing that could be done. It was often said this is the so-called train-spotting generation, proving hard to reach. The cruel reality is that many of those dying weren't even born at that time. Now, in the last days of this session, there's an opportunity to reflect and an opportunity to try to set the next Parliament on a better course. The motion today is candid, but there can be no other conclusion. The last 5 years have been a collective failure. The official records tell of 4,253 lives lost since 2016. The final toll is likely to be greater still. The pain that will be felt by families and friends will still remain very raw. And I add my condolences to those expressed by other colleagues. People are dying preventable deaths 3, 4, 5 and sometimes even 6 decades before their time. We owe it to all of them to drop any lingering excuses. There are none. And we owe it to all of them to do everything possible to turn this around. Everything possible will need to include some things we are still told are impossible. I think Peter Creekant has helped prove that. One man going out day after day, determined to save lives. He didn't care about the consequences for himself of going out. He cared about the consequences for others if he didn't. Deputy Presiding Officer, if my amendment sounds familiar to members, it's because it's virtually word for word that which my colleague Alex Cole-Hamilton tabled 14 months ago. On that day, it only gathered the support of Liberal Democrat colleagues and colleagues on the Labour benches. So I'm returning to Parliament today hopeful of a different outcome this time round. We've asked the new Drugs Minister to look afresh at all our proposals, and I hope that she will indeed see their merits. Indeed, the First Minister announced in January that additional funding would be made available, starting immediately, to make heroin-assisted treatment services more widely accessible across the country. The Royal College of Physicians of Edinburgh is calling for this to be in all major centres. There are people across Scotland who cannot afford to wait. Turning to the second part of my amendment, I'm asking for Parliament to agree to what I believe is an important principle, that people in possession of drugs for personal use should be diverted into treatment, and that prison is not the place for vulnerable people whose crime is to be gripped by addiction. We couldn't secure agreement for this on 30th January 2020. From what we could tell, the government was nervous about the precise wording, keen not to step on the Lord Advocate's toes. So forgive us for being slightly surprised when only 5 days later the government was in the Daily Record, arguably doing just that. Scottish Liberal Democrats have been highlighting the pilots in Durham and Thames Valley for some time now, schemes that have been badged as de facto decriminalisation. And here was the Minister saying, I think the Lord Advocate will be influenced by the evidence. Now I want to welcome the work of the Daily Record. It's campaigned hard for changes to our drug policies. Target the dealers, get people into treatment. Putting disagreements aside over how it's done, Parliament could at least agree to that decriminalisation principle today. The police are asking for change. Assistant Chief Constable Steve Johnson gave devastating evidence to the Scottish Affairs Committee in July 2019. He told MPs, and I quote, "It's just a matter of time. They come through the custody door, they get processed through the criminal justice process, they go in through the Sheriff Court, they go into prison. Of those people that come out of prison, 11% of them will die within the first month of having been released." He added, "The police officers get used to this carousel, this sense of hopelessness and helplessness. The first duty of every police officer is to preserve life, and when people do not come back through the doors with that alarming frequency, it is probably because the person is dead. It is not because there has been a successful intervention through the criminal justice process. That is a sense of foreboding within law enforcement." You can understand why the Assistant Chief Constable was urging courage. We're all looking, during this debate, at what can be salvaged from 5, frankly, terrible years. It will always be for the incoming government to take forward its agenda, but such a statement in favour of decriminalisation from the outgoing Parliament would, I believe, be difficult to ignore. And on that basis, I move the amendment in my name. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr MacArthur. And I call on Alison Johnson to open for the Green Party. Ms Johnson, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to begin by confirming Scottish Green support for the government motion with its frank admission of failure in regard to drugs deaths. It is indeed a mark of shame in our nation. And it's vitally important, therefore, that we build consensus around a commitment, a national commitment to deal with drugs deaths. This is an emergency. We're in an emergency right now. And in this spirit, the Scottish Greens will support the Labour and Lib Dem amendments too this afternoon. However, I must underline clearly the views of the Scottish Green Party. In 2016, we stood on a manifesto that said that we believe that the criminalisation of drugs use creates more harm than having managed and regulated supplies. It ties up much police time, and it's clear that decades of effort have failed to eradicate drug use from society. And while I too welcome increased investment in rehabilitation, we cannot support the Conservative motion, which may even unintentionally stigmatise important pharmaceutical interventions. As colleagues have noted, 1,264 people lost their lives to a preventable fatal drug overdose in 2019, and I would like to express my condolences to everyone who's lost a loved one to drug use. The Scottish Greens have always been clear. This is a public health emergency. We can't arrest our way out of the drug deaths crisis. We need to help people to manage their drug use rather than to punish them for it. This punitive approach has led to stigma. People who use drugs may be subject to multiple stigmas, including that associated with HIV status, homelessness, and mental health conditions. We have a long way to go before public services and wider society are actually inclusive of people who use drugs, especially while the trauma of criminalisation is still being inflicted on them. I've spoken in this chamber before about the pejorative language that is used too often and flippantly to describe people who are still marginalised and neglected by wider society. Language matters. Drug users are members of our society. They're part of our communities, and we must value them as such. Great work is being done to reduce stigma locally, including around illnesses that are frequently associated with drug use. And I again want to highlight the excellent work of the Edinburgh Access practice, which provides care for people who are experiencing difficulty in accessing primary health care, including drug users. 21,000 people in Scotland are estimated to be chronically infected with hepatitis C, and around 90% of new infections occur through sharing contaminated drug-injecting equipment. We have the opportunity to eliminate Hep C in a matter of years, but despite a dramatic increase in completing treatment for hepatitis C, 1 in 5 people in Scotland who inject drugs has hepatitis C. So we need a focus on evidence-based harm reduction services, such as needle and syringe programmes, if we're to achieve elimination. Other countries have shifted their focus to harm reduction. In Portugal, authorities have adopted a social inclusion model, and those who are referred to treatment are they're offered integrated outpatient treatment that addresses the individual's physical, psychological and social needs. People who are dependent on drugs who are encouraged to seek treatment, but they're rarely sanctioned if they choose not to. In Portugal, decriminalisation is not promoted as the sole response. It's complemented by the allocation of greater resources across the drugs field, the expansion and improvement of prevention, treatment, harm reduction and social reintegration programmes. And the introduction of these measures coincided with an expansion of the Portuguese welfare state, including a guaranteed minimum income. It's clear that while anyone can be affected by drug use, there is a clear link between deprivation and drug use, and more than half of homeless deaths in 2019 were drug-related. We must address this if we're to take a preventative approach. My colleagues, Patrick Harvey and John Finney, have previously written to the Lord Advocate to urge him to use his authority to exempt life-saving services such as safe drug consumption rooms from prosecution. In the past, Lord Advocates have used discretion to ensure that prosecutions aren't brought on issues when doing so is clearly at odds with the public interest. This discretion was used in the recent past when homosexual sex was still criminalised. And the Lord Advocate has published prosecuting guidelines in relation to the use of naloxone. But in his reply to my colleagues, he said that this is quite different from providing a statement of prosecution policy of general application. This is disappointing, as establishing safe consumption facilities could play a significant role in reducing drug-related deaths and other serious harms, such as the transmission of disease. The Lord Advocate has the power to act now, and I urge him to use his public interest discretion to ensure that no health professionals would face prosecution for providing life-saving health interventions. I appreciate what colleagues have said on this issue too, and I look forward to working with them to push this issue forward. I mean, access to treatment must be improved. Scotland has a low rate of people in treatment. 35 to 40% of people who'd be protected from death and other harms by being in treatment are actually in that treatment, compared to 60% in England. And we're also poor at keeping people in treatment. I appreciate, Presiding Officer, that I'm over time. I'm very much looking forward to the contributions of Jenny Mara and Neil Findlay on this issue too. As others have noted, this is their final contributions, I believe, and it's fitting that they too are taking part in this debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Johnson. Yes, it is, and indeed I am conscious that it may be Maureen Watt's final contribution too, and I call Maureen Watt to be followed by Annie Wells.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. In putting my name forward to speak in this debate, I wasn't thinking it might be my last contribution in this chamber. As a member of the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee, I've been fully involved in helping my friend Emma Harper get her bill on the worrying of livestock through, and I thought I might be speaking in the Stage 3 debate on that next week, but we'll see. But I will have some valedictory words to make at the end of my contribution. It struck me when preparing for...
Ms Watt, could you just lift your microphone up? Your microphone, I think, is...
Sorry, beg your pardon, sorry. I hope you heard that first bit. It struck me when preparing for this debate that my very first speech in Committee Room 2, because a beam over there had fallen down, was on drug harm. So it's a real coincidence that I am finishing speaking on this. And we've made some significant changes and progress since then, not least that back then it was still a justice issue, and now drug harm is a health issue. And it's really important that we have made that change, because all the devolved administrations in Ireland have too, and at meetings that I attended in the British Irish Council, it was really striking that the UK Westminster government was still the only one that is living in the past and still regards it as a justice issue. The number of drugs-related deaths that others have said too in Scotland is totally unacceptable and brings an equivalent unacceptable level of sadness and pain to families and friends. But if the solutions to reducing their toll was easy, it would have been introduced by now. And it's so all wrapped up with people's living conditions, their poverty, their lack of ambition and seeing any way out of the conditions that they're in. And we have to understand the situation that every drug addict and drug death that has occurred, we need to find, we know what has led to that, to find the solutions. But I'm heartened in reading the briefing from the Scottish Drugs Death Task Force that they recognise this. They focus on emergency response, and I'm pleased to have worked with families in the North East who have seen the benefits of naloxone use and have been vocal in spreading the message of its worth. Every addict and their family and friends should have naloxone to hand and know how to use it. On reducing risks, I cannot for the life of me understand why the UK government prevents us introducing safe injecting centres. The opposition is ideologically driven and shows how we can and must do better with our own powers on this. Their existence hasn't been proven to work in other countries, and with such a problem here, we need to have that tool too. In the debate back then, as now, everyone recognised that residential facilities can provide a way off drugs, but must be shown to work in the longer term, and how people can develop the resilience and resistance they need to cope when they're back in their own communities. Early intervention and prevention too are key, and education from an early age on the dangers of substance misuse is key, and that the children in substance misuse households are identified early and given the necessary support. And there are third sector organisations who do excellent work in this area, and they need the financial stability to continue their work. Organisations too, like Aberdeen Drugs Action, have a key role to be available to provide immediate pathways when addicts feel they are ready to ask for and need help. Many of those suffering with drug addiction, as James Kelly and others have said, also have mental health problems, and their issues must be tackled in tandem at all levels, including primary care level. Cabinet Secretary, in my speech back then, I drew on the experience as a prison visitor, and as you, as a formal criminal justice social worker, you know too how vital it is that those who entered prison with an addiction are not released without ongoing support, with accommodation, training opportunities, all mapped out, and the cases of prisoners being released, finding the doors of temporary accommodation shut, is just not acceptable. Presiding Officer, I have the utmost respect for workers in the fields of drug action, and I think their expertise and importance needs better recognition by all, including health, local health and social care partnerships, and not least those of peer support workers who, having had the experience of addiction, they have the respect and confidence of those now trying to escape the scourge of addiction. And I hope some of the extra funds may be channelled in their direction. Presiding Officer, it has been the privilege and joy of my life to be able to represent, firstly, the people of the whole of the North East, and latterly, the wonderful folk of Aberdeen South and North Kincardine from 2011. It's a very diverse constituency, with many involved in oil and gas, as I had been, and I'm delighted to have been a co-convener of the cross-party group on oil and gas to carry forward the contribution of this vital industry, and that they can lead Scotland past peak oil and into the new era of alternative energy, and that the skills and ingenuity of the workforce there can transition to green energy and make Aberdeen the all-energy capital of Europe. It was beyond my wildest imagination that 5 of my 15 years have been serving in a ministerial capacity. Having raised the profile of Doric in my first day, I was able to embed in Curriculum for Excellence the use of all Scotland's languages in the school curriculum. As Minister for Public Health, I set up Food Standards Scotland with its headquarters in Aberdeen, introduced the duty of candour into the health service, and launched the out-of-hospital cardiac arrest strategy, which has seen over 500,000 of our population trained in CPR and able to save so many lives. And finally, the first ever dedicated Minister for Mental Health, which was so novel that the World Health Forum, Mental Health Forum, held one of its few meetings outside the US here in Scotland to see what we were doing in the field of mental health and prioritising parity of esteem between physical and mental health, and how we need to look at the whole person. It's so important in relation to reducing drugs harm as anywhere else. Presiding officer, none of this work would have been possible without my teams of staff over the years. 5 of them, well, 4 plus a son, have gone on to elected office, either in here or in Westminster. All men, unfortunately, but that is changing. I helped encourage Gillian Martin to stand, and she and I are mentoring women who hopefully will be here in the next session. I'd like to thank ministerial office staff and other civil servants who display the utmost dedication to their ministers and their work, and the clerking teams and all other parliamentary staff who make the work here run so smoothly and effectively. I thank my totally supportive but long-suffering family, and I look forward when I'm able to see them in London and Paris with my husband. While I have lots to do in retirement, and I don't like that word, I will miss the camaraderie of colleagues across the chamber. Presiding officer, and this is my final point, during the last session more than ever, I've been struck how fragile democracy is here in the UK and not just in other countries throughout the world. So it ill behoves people who come and sit in this place, who are at the same time prepared to rubbish devolution and diminish this Parliament and demean this Parliament by their behaviour. It is so important that, as well as new members learning from induction by the Parliament itself, that political parties too induct and mentor their new members on policies and procedure and the behaviour expected in this place. That is what our electors expect, and they deserve no less. I am totally hopeful that this Parliament and Government will continue to lead in so many ways and will soon soar in an independent Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms Ward. Can I call Annie Wells to be followed by Emma Harper?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I too would like to wish Maureen Watt, Jenny Mara and Neil Findlay all the best for the future. As this parliamentary session draws to a close, I'm reminded of one of the first speeches as an MSP was on the issues of drug usage in Scotland. Looking out of my window from my home in Springburn, I saw firsthand the impact the drug death crisis had on the victims, their families and the wider community. Back then, the scale of the emergency was clear, and it demanded immediate action if we were to tide the flow of the drug deaths. But this action was not forthcoming, and the emergency had been allowed to emerge as a full-scale crisis. It's clear a comprehensive plan is required to tackle this crisis. To our country's shame, has robbed people of their lives well before their time. We owe it to the victims of drug deaths to do better. Therefore, although a national plan is necessary, it's long overdue, and in many victims' cases, it has come far too late. Presiding Officer, we can't ignore how the drug death crisis has significantly worsened in recent years, and who bears the responsibility for this? The government themselves admitted, and I welcome this acknowledgement, that much more could have been done to prevent Scots from losing their lives to drugs. The statistics don't lie, they paint a stark picture. The drug death rate across Scotland has more than doubled since the SNP came to power in 2007. Take my home city of Glasgow, for example, where in 2007 there were 147 recorded deaths because of drugs in the Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board. And fast forward to 2019, and there were a staggering 404 deaths recorded in that year alone. Glaswegians always pride ourselves in our city's famous motto, people make Glasgow. But the reality is, Presiding Officer, that these words ring hollow for those who are addicted to drugs in Scotland's largest city, as these men and women are being badly let down by the government's handling of the crisis. The same story is repeated time and time again across Scotland as this crisis deepens. How on earth have we arrived at this point, where the drug death rate in Scotland is now 3.5 times worse than the rest of the UK, not to mention the worst in Europe. I have always said that actions speak louder than words on this issue. However, my main frustration has been that despite identifying problems, the government has been far too slow to act on them. Residential rehab is a case in point. We on these benches, alongside community groups such as Favour Scotland, have repeatedly urged the government to fund rehabilitation and recovery programmes to the hilt. This can hardly have been said to be the case in recent years, as in 2019 to 2020, the SNP government only funded a mere 13% of residential rehab places. I say to the Chamber, rehabilitation services saves lives. That's why last year the Scottish Conservatives called on the SNP to properly fund residential rehab to the tune of £20 million per year to guarantee these services are equipped to support users when they need professional help the most. Although I was delighted that the First Minister finally listened to our calls by pledging £20 million in January, the announcement was well overdue. Presiding Officer, the Minister has said that no part of Scotland can be left behind in tackling the drugs deaths crisis. Coming from a city where drug deaths have historically been higher than other areas of Scotland, I agree with her. But I return to my original point that we need action, not promises. And with many other policy areas, I remain concerned that for this government, their heads and focus remain elsewhere. With fatalities as high as they are in Scotland, it can be easy to let people at the heart of this crisis become statistics, figures, or something to be analysed. We must not forget that each person who tragically loses their lives to drugs is someone's parent, child, or close friend. One day, like the pandemic, we can hopefully look back on this crisis as a thing of the past. But to get there, we need a government who is bold enough and willing to confront this challenge head on. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Ms Wells. Can I call Emma Harper to be followed by Neil Findlay?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First, I want to give a warm thank you to Maureen Watt. She's been very supportive and helpful for me during this session, including for my livestock bill, which she mentioned earlier, and I wish her well in the future. Presiding Officer, I welcome the opportunity to speak in this important debate today. Each and every drug-related death is a tragedy, and I offer my condolences to the family, friends and loved ones of those who have lost their lives. Drug policy and the issue of drug deaths in Scotland is something I have been actively working on since my election. As Deputy Convener of the Health and Sport Committee, I had the opportunity to participate in the Scottish Affairs Committee inquiry into Scottish drug-related deaths in 2019. The inquiry heard directly from support agencies, health services, academics, those with lived experience and families. And the Minister mentioned earlier that those with lived and living experience must be listened to, and that was highlighted in her opening remarks. All the witnesses at the committee agreed that urgent reform is needed to reduce drugs deaths in Scotland and across the UK. The inquiry heard from experts from Portugal, Germany and Canada, and we examined the evidence of taking a progressive public health approach, not a punitive criminal approach, to tackling problem drug use. And Maureen Watt spoke about this also. Drug deaths and addiction in these countries has reduced significantly, and as much as 40% in Canada. The inquiry recommended that personal amounts of drugs should be decriminalised and that the UK Government must urgently bring forward legislation to devolve powers to the Scottish Parliament so that Scotland can have our own approach to drug addiction, including the establishment of safe consumption rooms. I and others have been campaigning for safe consumption rooms. Safe consumption rooms save lives, yet the UK Government continues to oppose giving Scotland the power to use them. Such reforms would prevent Peter Crikant, who I met outside Parliament with colleague Stuart McMillan before Christmas recess, and that would prevent people like Peter from potential criminal action, because Peter wants to help support people to use substances in a safe environment so that they cannot be judged when they use them. This could be a first step for addicts to ask for help. Reform of the reserved Westminster legislation is one item in the toolbox which could be employed to tackle harmful drug use, and I'm keen to hear what the Minister thinks on this. Presiding Officer, back in 2018, I helped plant a tree to mark the opening of River Garden Auchincruve at Ayr with the CEO Colin Crosby. It's a third sector residential training and development centre for people recovering from drug or alcohol addiction and harmful use. River Garden team, they do an amazing work there, and River Garden is a great example of what is possible. But we also need to remember that to defeat drug addiction, we need more than residential rehabilitation. Tackling drugs and alcohol addiction in Scotland requires multimodal work and a toolbox full of many different tools designed for different needs. And the Minister has spoke about this today and previously also. Presiding Officer, I welcome both our First Minister's announcement of additional funding of £250 million for drug services and making £5 million available now to support immediate and urgent action. I also welcome the Drug Death Task Force has published its plan, which builds on 6 strategies and includes the 2020 to 2022 timeline across 3 focus areas. Emergency response, such as preventing fatal overdose by targeting distribution of naloxone, reducing risk and reducing vulnerability. I recently spoke to Graham Clark, who's lead for Alcohol and Drug Service in Dumfries and Galloway, and he described in-depth work that he and his team already are engaging in, including assertive outreach and looking at how they can disrupt the street benzodiazepines as part of the challenges for our rural area. That's one thing that they're really keen to see how they can tackle that. I look forward to meeting with Graham and the Minister next Tuesday, actually, and I thank the Minister for finding time ahead of recess to meet with me to look at the challenges for rural parts of Scotland. Both Colin Crosby, who I've mentioned, and Graham Clark said that tackling stigma was a huge part of what action that needs to be taken, and I welcome anything that we can do to tackle that. In summing up, Presiding Officer, I welcome the swift action which the First Minister and the Drug Policy Minister have taken so far, and I ask for a commitment from the Minister that the new policy approach will ensure that rural parts of Scotland are absolutely included, considered and listened to. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Ms Harper. And can I call Neil Findlay to be followed by Bob Doris? And as members have noted, this may be Neil Findlay's last substantive contribution.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. He was in Parliament twice. Aged 16 for 10 days, then aged 17 for 7 months. He got more drugs in prison than he did in the community. He took an allergic reaction in prison where his mouth swelled up and he was left that way. His lawyer had to write to the Governor to ask for better care. He had brittle asthma. At times, due to staff shortages, he was locked up for 23 hours at a time with little outside time for fresh air. He needed rehab and treatment instead of being locked up. He died on Tuesday, aged 20, at Carmondine, in Livingston, in my constituency and the Minister's constituency, having used heroin and benzodiazepine. One of 3 people to die a preventable death in Scotland that day. Presiding Officer, we have the worst drugs death rate in the developed world. Worse than the US, a shameful, damning indictment of 20 years of this institution being in control of justice and health policy. The government cut the drugs budget and then wondered why deaths rise. Peter Crichton is forced to go out each day in an old van that he had to buy at his own expense to save lives, while ministers pretend that they are powerless to act to provide the same services and engage in constitutional games. The simple fact is people cannot access the services they need. An appointment to see a psychologist in Lothian is between 18 and 24 months just now. It's supposed to be 18 weeks. Aren't we all ashamed of what's happening on the streets, yards from us, in every one of our constituencies? Well, we bloody well should be. It was watching Thatcher's class war against communities that sparked my interest and my political awakening. And today, in those very same communities, working class lives are ending unnecessarily because of a failed drugs policy. Think of all the families who've lost a child or a partner lying in a manky alleyway with a needle in their arm or a fake benzo in their belly. And then think of the footballer, the nurse, or the tradesperson they could have been. That waste of talent, the deaths of people like me, like my family, my pals, and my community. That's what drives my campaigning on this. And I've said it many times, but if this carnage was happening in the leafy suburbs or commuter villages, it would have been sorted a long time ago. Presiding Officer, there will be no political leaders canvassing homeless drug users. They won't be in here getting canopies and warm wine. But we'll walk past them on the way to the train tonight. I will. And the Minister and our colleagues will drive past them in their ministerial cars on the way home. Presiding Officer, we need a revolution in drugs policy. Decriminalisation, massive investment in care and treatment, and an all-out attack on the inequalities that feed the despair and homelessness. And if we don't, the bodies will pile higher and higher and higher. Presiding Officer, with your indulgence, I'll say a wee bit about my time in Parliament. I have to say, no one was more surprised than me when I made it through the Labour Party vetting process, never mind get elected. People from the left were not particularly welcome then. I'm not sure they're particularly welcome now. I had only been in this building twice before coming into Parliament. The only MSP I knew was my pal Elaine Smith. But I made a pledge to have a go, and others can decide whether I did. I want to thank my parliamentary team of Caitlin, Mary Teresa, Jordan, Mary and Tommy. They are wonderful colleagues and friends. Excuse me. My family and pals who've kept my feet on the ground, and my wife Fiona and daughter Chloe. I don't think it's any surprise to anybody that I've enjoyed myself most when on the backbenches here, working with the magnificent Scottish mesh survivors. Together we secured a suspension and a fund to support injured women, with Scottish miners securing the independent review and a commitment to a pardon after almost 40 years. With the families of children who will continue to use St John's Children's Ward because we prevented its downgrade. With the communities who successfully stopped the expansion of Edinburgh Airport's flight paths. With the blacklisted construction workers. And this week we mourn the loss of Francie Graham, a stalwart of the campaign. And working with the Daily Record's editor then, political editor David Clegg, to convince the Record to take up the cause of drugs and to convince them to go that step further and call for decriminalisation. I am so pleased they did, because that's been very influential. I've enjoyed every day a call for well-funded publicly owned services and the end to the madness of privatisation. Every day I've worked with the families of care home residents, exposing the human rights abuse of our older people. Every day I've worked with trade unions, and every day I've represented my constituents in a huge range of issues. I even enjoyed the 60-odd public meetings I spoke at during the independence referendum, arguing for Devo Max, and I'll continue to argue that that is the best option for Scotland's future. I enjoyed chairing my friend Jeremy Cormann's 2 leadership campaigns in Scotland, and by God, how I wish we'd won that 2017 election and radically changed our country for the better. I even enjoyed standing for Labour leader. Well, we've all had a go at some point, haven't we? On a socialist platform. And I enjoyed the times I screwed up sending my entire budget speech to Derek Mackay minutes before the budget, and sending everybody in the Parliament a reply to a confidential email from Mike Russell. IT was never my strong point. I have a saying that you can't be a socialist and a pessimist. I remember once using that line in a debate, and David McLetchie intervened to say, well, if that's the case, why do these all look so bloody miserable? I like debating with David McLetchie. But I'm not miserable, and I'm not pessimistic. I believe more than ever that socialism is the answer to the biggest questions we have. Poverty, climate change, hunger, conflict and exploitation. We're in this situation because of free market capitalism. That's why we're here, on the precipice of a disaster for our planet. These can only be addressed by a planned economy, by public ownership and by international solidarity. We are all brothers and sisters, irrespective of our political view, and we have as much duty to feed and educate a child in war-torn Yemen as we do in that school next door. Those principles are alien to anyone who believes in capitalism. Finally, Presiding Officer, make a plea to those who follow me. Speak up. Challenge others and challenge your own party. Be awkward. Don't accept the line, that's how it's always been done. Take up issues. Don't be afraid to be rebuffed. Just come back again with the same issue until you win. And finally, enjoy yourself, because I certainly have.
Thank you very much, Mr Finlay, and I'm glad I didn't pick up on your bad language in the middle of the earlier speech. So, Bob Doris to be followed by Miles Briggs. Mr Doris.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think Neil Findlay's just demonstrated why he'll be a loss to this place, a major loss. I hope we can welcome him back. I hope it doesn't mind me saying so. I hope that's an independent Scottish Parliament, despite our different constitutional views. You've been an asset in an independent Parliament for sure, Mr Findlay. So good luck in the future. Likewise to my colleague and friend Maureen Watt, a wonderful and emotional speech. You'll be a great loss to this place. Thank you for years of service. And I'll be in the Chamber, of course, for Jenny Mara's final speech, and I look forward to that as well. Thank you, everyone, for their contributions to our national endeavour. But I wanted to contribute in this afternoon's debate because I saw it as an opportunity to move the political debate on in our drugs death crisis into a place where it will become that national endeavour on behalf of us all. The debate is entitled A National Mission to Reduce Drugs Deaths and Harms. I do not suggest that in doing so we somehow ease up the scrutiny on the Scottish Government. Quite the reverse. Indeed, it has rightly been acknowledged by the First Minister that we should have done more to tackle the drugs death crisis. It is right that we acknowledge that as a mark of shame in the nation, and the way forward for us all would be plot that way forward together now. There is now consensus there needs to be a significant additional access to residential rehabilitation across Scotland. I acknowledge there will now be significant expansion of those beds. I had called for that for some time, as had the opposition parties, and it will now happen. And it can happen at speed, because we've heard the Minister say that in just 2 months, with a £3 million investment, 150 more people have benefited from residential rehab. That's an achievement. Not anywhere near enough, but that's a remarkable achievement in such a small period of time. I would be interested to know more about the timeline for that progress to expand it further and how we will monitor outcomes. And when I say outcomes, I mean how that impacts how we can save lives, how we can improve the quality of people's lives, not just those who are living with addiction, but the families and the scarring effect that can have on their families also. The Minister mentioned MAT standards. I think he said they've been introduced in bed by April 2023. I have to find out more about them, Minister, but national standards to accessing a range of supports and treatments, including, of course, residential rehab, would be incredibly welcome. Some of those who have been delivering and designing services for some time have not always seen residential rehab as a priority. I think that's self-evident. So why else would ADPs have reduced commissioning and delivery of those beds so dramatically? But we can now have to come together, irrespective of those previous positions, and make this work. ADPs can rise to that challenge. They can embrace a rejuvenated investment in those beds, and they can also embrace grassroots organisations who have authenticity and lived experience, who help fund and empower them to do the great work they do in the communities. For instance, Cisco, who I know the Minister has met with myself, are now strategic partners of Glasgow's ADP, and I hope they will secure funding via CORA for their excellent work in prisons. And following other funding schemes announced today, I very much hope they will get additional funds in the future for their work in the community. They are advocates for those living with or who have been scarred by addiction. And those striving for recovery often feel their treatment choices are simply denied to them. I'm thinking of a constituent from just a few weeks ago who came to me, mental health issues, been trying to get themselves off methadone, reducing their dose themselves, really struggling, wanted prescription by benzodiazepines, diazepam, to support them and stabilise them, refused their script. The only option for them was to increase their dosage. That wasn't what they wanted. Where was the treatment choice option and empowerment for them? We have to empower people along the way in their treatment. In the brief time I've got left, I did actually want to mention, Presiding Officer, a good friend of mine, the Reverend Brian Casey, Springburn Parish Church Minister, who talks about truth and reconciliation and helping communities. And I'll very briefly quote him if I have the time. He talks about South Africa, and that's why Truth and Reconciliation is mentioned. One of the things that helped the healing process to begin there was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission headed by Archbishop Tutu. The families of the murdered and brutalised came face to face with those in the security forces who had committed the crime. Testimony, documented evidence, seeing that story repeated back to you can be just as powerful for those who have their lives scarred and destroyed by drug addiction in our communities. And Reverend Casey thinks we should be documenting that story, documenting that narrative and capturing those stories. I agree with him. We have to not just find a way of getting those living with addiction into recovery. We have to find a way of communities recovering who've been so scarred by addiction. I know the Minister's diary doesn't let her meet Reverend Casey in this parliamentary session. It will not surprise you, Presiding Officer, that I hope that Angela Constant will be in the same post in just a few weeks' time, and I look forward, hopefully, to meeting you with Reverend Casey to talk about his ideas about that national reconciliation, the truth and reconciliation that can help our communities recover. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Doris. Can I call Miles Briggs to be followed by Ruth Maguire?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I start by congratulating Maureen Watt on her final speech, and also for her service to the North East over many years. She comes from a political family, a very outstanding political family in North East, including her father, Hamish. So I wish her well in her retirement and thank her for the kindness she has showed members across this chamber. It's amazing, as members stand down, we find nice things to say about each other. But can I also, and he will hate this, but praise Neil Findlay as well, because during his time on the Health and Sport Committee, I think the work he undertook has really driven us to this debate today, and all of us who were on that committee, not able to accept a single drug death in Scotland today, should be taking place. And although I won't be able to, I'll be hearing Jenny Mara's comments soon, I'd like to pay tribute to both of them for their service to this Parliament. I'm sure they're leaving Parliament to go into politics, really, but I wish them both well. Presiding Officer, may I also take this opportunity to add my thoughts and sympathies to all those who have lost their lives to drug addiction in Scotland over many years. In the time I have today, I wanted to touch upon a number of issues which I believe are important if we as a Parliament are genuinely going to take action to reduce drug deaths as a national mission. And access to treatments is absolutely critical in achieving that. Members across the chamber will have received a documentary called The Final Fix by documentary maker Norman Stone. I'd like to thank him and pay tribute to the relentless work which he has actually undertaken to try to engage with decision makers and draw attention to neuroelectric therapy. I welcome the constructive meetings which I've had with the new Minister and the open mind which she has said she has to looking at new treatments. I also welcome the signal over the weekend from the Minister that funding could be made available for a study and a pilot study here in Scotland. I think would be a welcome step forward to looking at NET. Presiding Officer, during my time as a Lothian MSP over the last 5 years, and while serving on the Health and Sport Committee and as Shadow Health Secretary, I've had the opportunity to visit addiction services across Scotland and to meet with service users. In that time, I've had many an open and frank discussion with people living with addictions. I've learnt a lot, and it's very much opened my eyes to many people living with addictions and the issues they face in Scotland today. And what I have to say was verging on a breakdown in local services for addicts and their families across Scotland. One of the most difficult issues which our society must understand and address is childhood trauma is often the underlying reason why many people abuse drugs. Often it's a coping strategy or just an escape. Now, I have met and assisted an individual here in Edinburgh who was homeless, sleeping in a city graveyard for his own safety. He'd run away from home at a young age. He'd suffered severe mental health trauma throughout his life, was a care-experienced individual, and couldn't read or write. Now, I think it's widely understood that people living with addictions across Scotland are the same individuals who often desperately try to access services in a chaotic way, which sees them too often slip through the gaps in our public services. And I welcome the ministerial implementation group which was outlined, but this cannot be a talking shop. We need to see all our public services actively looking at this. And the Housing First model is incredibly important. And I know the Minister has been reaching out to a number of organisations and rehab providers across Scotland, including the hugely impressive model that is Safe as Houses, run by Alternatives in West Dunbartonshire Community Drug Services. And if there's one lesson we need to learn going forward, it's that services should be resourced and be able to respond and expect drug addicts to fail and relapse, but keep them in services. That is one of the things which I think too often we have seen fail people. Now, I strongly believe that a commitment to fund Housing First model, for example, can deliver the engagement and support vulnerable people living with addictions need, along with the peer support programmes that can go along with them to stop overdose deaths, as well as getting people into long-term sustainable recovery, whatever that looks like for each individual. Presiding Officer, we know that for a significant number of addicts, the root problem of addiction is often sexual abuse as a child. It's part of the drug death scandal that many will not want to directly look at, and perhaps as a country is one of the darkest issues we face. But child abuse is a subject which for too long has not been given the priority it needs, and we must understand this in the context of addiction and the critical need to improve access to mental health services at the very start of treatment. And I hope that the Minister and the Mental Health Minister who was here earlier will take that point on board, and when they're looking at the redesign of services and the important role which the third sector has to play in that. I also want to put on record concerns which have been raised with me by family members and people living with addictions. In many cases, families have assisted, and families who I have assisted over the last 5 years have the same story to tell, and that is being seen as part of the problem and not given the support they need to help a loved one. It's often families and friends who are the 24-hour, 7-day-a-week person living with someone with addictions. That relationship can obviously break down and does often over time, but we need to see investment to support families who are trying to desperately look after a loved one or a friend with addictions. I very much welcome the £3 million which the Minister has outlined today, something that I've been campaigning for a number of years. To conclude, Presiding Officer, if we're genuinely going to see a shift towards making reducing deaths and harm, drug deaths and harm, a national mission, then it has to be embedded in all key outcomes focused on access to treatment and rehab services. The Minister spoke about treatment targets, and I hope she can give us more information on that when these will be published. But that will be absolutely critical. If person-centred care is actually going to be at the heart of this, then co-decision making with people accessing services must also be embedded. Today, Presiding Officer, must just be the start of what is that national mission to help save lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Briggs. Just to let members know, we are substantially behind our schedule for understandable reasons, although it's not just the members who are making valedictory remarks who are going over time. Can I call Ruth Maguire? So just to let members know, decision time will be quite late today, I think. And we're adding an urgent question at the end of the day. Ruth Maguire to be followed by Stuart McMillan. Ruth Maguire.
Presiding Officer, the number of drug-related deaths in Scotland is unacceptable. Each and every one of those lives lost is a tragedy. Lives cut short too soon, important lives. Mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, friends who were loved. The family and friends of those who have lost their lives are in my thoughts as I speak this afternoon. I want to commend the Scottish Government on acknowledging and accepting that it should have done more and done it earlier, in moving forward and working to improve the lives of those with problematic drug and alcohol use and prevent these avoidable deaths. This acknowledgement illustrates to me, and hopefully, and indeed more importantly, to those working so hard on the ground in the midst of this crisis, that change will happen. As the Minister outlined in opening, the Scottish Government has announced that it will focus on 5 areas of priority: fast and appropriate treatment, residential rehabilitation, a more holistic approach, frontline third sector organisations, and overdose prevention facilities. In terms of fast and appropriate access to treatment, I hope that that will include drop-in access and same-day prescribing. The window where someone's in a space where they're ready for treatment can be small. We need to make sure the right support is available within our communities at the right time, tailored towards the needs of each individual and their families. As the Minister said, our services have to be able to catch people where they are and when they're ready, and of course hang on to them and hold them tight. So barriers to access should be identified and removed. This will be done by centring the needs of the individuals needing help, not the organisations delivering treatment. I particularly welcome the Minister's comments about including lived experience through experience panels. I want to welcome the Scottish Government's commitment to ensure that residential rehabilitation is available to everyone who wants it, and importantly for whom it's deemed to be clinically appropriate at the time when they ask for it in every part of the country. But we need to see residential rehab in the context of wider community services and community rehabilitation. And we also need to consider what happens to people when they return to their local community. Problem drug and alcohol use is a symptom of wider difficulties for an individual. The creation of a more joined-up approach that supports people living with drug addiction to address all the underlying challenges that they face, of which, as I've said, drug addiction is often just the symptom, and which ensures better support after non-fatal overdoses, is essential. People don't just need freedom from the physical addiction to survive and thrive. They need somewhere warm and safe to live, access to healthcare, human contact, connection and purpose in their lives. People need hope. I know the government understands the vital role of frontline, often third sector organisations within our communities. In this regard, I think that we need to make sure we're putting our money where our mouths are, actual money. I think too often in the past, policymakers and government have been fine with praising the work of smaller organisations in our community, holding them up as great examples. But when it came down to funding, they've too often fallen through the cracks. This has to end. In particular, where these organisations are taking referrals from statutory services and providing support, where we have confidence in their ability to do the support work that's required, it's not acceptable to not provide funding. And with that in mind, I do welcome the funding announced by the Minister this afternoon. Presiding Officer, I've focused on the areas which I feel would have greatest impact on the communities that I represent. In terms of overdose prevention facilities, I think this is something which is perhaps more urgently required in our cities. And whilst I appreciate the limits of our current constitutional setup, I would simply urge the government to be bold and brave. This is about saving lives. Presiding Officer, if we meet people where they are with accessible, person-centred services, acknowledge and act upon what we know around the needs of those who find themselves vulnerable to harm because of problem drug and alcohol use, whilst funding good quality frontline services in our communities, we can save lives. More than that though, we can give people the best chance at fulfilling lives. Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Ms Maguire. And I call Stuart McMillan before we move to closing speeches. Stuart McMillan.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, first of all, I'd like to pay tribute to Neil Finlay and Jenny Mara, obviously today being their final speeches. And I probably haven't always agreed with Mr Finlay and Ms Mara, which obviously being in different parties, that's no doubt quite obvious, but I generally have respected the fact that they've taken different positions on a wide variety of issues as compared to what I would take, and I think they have made a very valuable contribution to the Scottish Parliament and to Scotland, and I wish you well when you leave the Parliament. I also like to do the same to Bill Bowman. We were on the Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee in this session, and I wish Bill well as well when he leaves. But also Maureen Watt. Maureen was actually one of the people who took me under her wing when I was first elected here in 2007. Maureen and Brian Adam, actually, and because of how they treated me, I felt as if I was an equal and not just a newbie who was just elected into the Parliament. So, Maureen, I want to thank you very much for that, for your friendship and also for your sage advice over the years, and I wish you well. Presiding Officer, I want to just remind everyone I'm a member, or the board member of Moving On Inverclyde, a local addictions service. This is very much an important debate, and I do welcome the opportunity to speak on it. I also welcome the appointment of a Minister for Drugs Policy. I did actually write to the First Minister asking for a dedicated minister in this field. I was asking for that to happen for the next parliamentary session, but I'm certainly pleased that Angela Constance has got that role, certainly for the remainder of this session and hopefully beyond. Almost 3,400 people in Scotland have lost their lives due to drug misuse in the last 3 years, including 80 who lived in Inverclyde. And each one of these deaths is very much a tragedy, and I do offer my condolences to the family, friends and loved ones of those who have lost their lives. But a number of the drug-related deaths in Scotland the number is very much simply unacceptable, and which is why I did welcome and very much do welcome the First Minister's declaration of a national mission to tackle the crisis that is blighting our communities, and some sadly more than others. The additional funding of £250 million over the next parliamentary session is very much welcome, and the additional £5 million made available immediately to ensure priority work gets underway as quickly as possible shows, however, that this new Minister and the Scottish Government are committed to provide that national mission with the leadership, focus and also resources that it needs to really turn this situation round to save lives. And as a member of Moving On Inverclyde, I know firsthand the vital role that the third sector organisations play in supporting people living with drug addiction. And we just heard comments from Ruth Maguire a moment ago, and I genuinely welcome the Scottish Government's commitment to actually work across the health and care sector to ensure that no door is the wrong door to help and support. Tackling the crisis also means putting our efforts into improving mental health support, reducing homelessness and ensuring that we have a humane and responsive justice system. The statutory services have a hugely important role in keeping people alive, but they can be limited in what they can provide for wider needs. And the third sector, therefore, they can assist in meeting service users' other needs and helping them to progress through their recovery. And direct funding to the third sector organisations from the Scottish Government would generally be the most welcome thing the Government could do to actually allow these services to focus on planning and also the delivering of the services that people need. And I've spoken about the third sector in debates about drugs before, which Mr Whittle, he was certainly in those debates. So I genuinely am pleased about the announcement today of the 4 new funds to help certainly in this regard. Presiding Officer, I do welcome that some of the immediate actions the Scottish Government are taking, including making heroin-assisted treatment services more widely accessible across the country. The work to increase the numbers in treatment, the rapid implementation of a recently developed treatment standards, the open additional residential rehabilitation placements, and also the extend outreach initiatives that identify those who are at risk, address immediate health concerns and connect them with other community or clinical services. But, Presiding Officer, there are 3 key aspects to moving forward. First is the partnership working. Second is the evidence-based solutions. And thirdly, listening and acting on people with lived experiences. We need, every single politician, everyone in this Parliament needs to ensure that we push ourselves and challenge ourselves and society to make the changes required and to save lives. If we don't do this, we will fail many more people, many more families and many more communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now move to closing speeches, and I call Liam MacArthur to be followed by Jenny Mara.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I start by acknowledging the contributions from the 3 colleagues who will be leaving the Parliament after this session. Maureen Watt and I share a love of Malawi, and I've enjoyed very much working with her in developing the relationship that this Parliament and Scotland as a whole has with the warm heart of Africa. I recall very well that she and I think, were part of the same delegation over to Malawi, headed up by former colleague Karen Gillan, and spent some time instructing classes in the Minga school just outside Lilongwe, although I am reassured that educational attainment in those classes has gone up since we departed the scene. But I wish her all the very, very best To Neil Findlay, it was a characteristically uncompromising valedictory contribution, but shot through with insight and deeply emotional. Can I also, I think, acknowledge what he said about the contribution that the Daily Record has played in terms of pushing in particular the case for decriminalisation. I don't think we should underestimate the significance of that. He may be leaving this building, but he has certainly left a lasting impression on me. I still bear the scars from his football boots in my knee after a typically, again, uncompromising take man and ball effort as the goalkeeper in the Scottish Parliament team as we defeated the MPs at Parkhead. I wish very much at that stage he'd kept his feet on the bloody ground. Apologies for that unparliamentary language. Deputy Presiding Officer, and to Jenny Mara, I'm looking forward to hearing her speech. I'd rather hoped I would have heard it before now, but she has spoken with real authority on pretty much any issue, but particularly in relation to drugs and the drugs death scandal. I think she has a passion and an insight and a tenacity that has done as much as anybody to push this agenda forward, and I thank her very much for that. In fact, I even forgive her for beating me hollow to the Community MSP of the Year award, which she rightly walked off with at the awards a few years ago. But I wish again her well in terms of what comes next for her. This has been a very different debate. I know we usually sum up these things by saying it's been a very interesting and helpful and constructive debate. I think it genuinely has been. I think the tone and the tenor of this debate has been very different from some of those we've had in the past, and part of that is to do with the candour. Candour, frankly, from the government's motion, I think doesn't really pull any punches and is expressed in ways that would have been the case a few years back, but the fact that it's expressed as such, I think, is very welcome. The Cabinet Secretary opened up in talking about Scotland's national shame. James Kelly talked about the failure of devolution. Donald Cameron talked about a collective shame, and I think that very much speaks to the significance of the issues that are under discussion today, but I think finds us in a much better place than perhaps we've been in previous debates. I think Donald Cameron was also right in acknowledging the approach of Angela Constance. I certainly, in working with her on the education brief previously, we may not have always agreed, but I always found her very approachable and willing to collaborate and explore ideas that are brought to her. And I think that's absolutely the approach needs to be taken in relation to our drugs death crisis. She talked about building on the lived and living experience in the panels that will instruct policy going forward here. And I think that's very much to be welcomed, although I think Neil Findlay again made a very telling point about those voices need to challenge as well. And I'm sure that will be the case. In accepting that what has been done to date is not good enough, I think we shouldn't then mistake that for saying that nothing that is being done at present is of value, and therefore we need to identify the stuff that is working and needs to be preserved as we then look ahead to what we need to do more radically and as was suggested by I think Donald Cameron, be more broad-minded. I think in that sense, Peter Crickant's brave work has shown what is really possible when we move beyond kind of rigid assumptions of what we can and cannot do. And we absolutely need to move beyond the debate around the Constitution. James Kelly and to her credit, Ruth Maguire, I think made that point, and that is absolutely essential. Again, I welcomed Angela Constance's reference to making sure that there are no or low barriers to treatment and that what is needed, where is needed, will be provided. I think also I would commend Jenny Mara for the point that she was making, that the plan that has been set out is one that I think we can all welcome. It takes us far beyond where we've been to date, light years from where we are now, I think she suggested. But we need to make absolutely sure that not just statutory services, but across the third sector, we're now able to deliver it. I welcome too the acknowledgement of the need to integrate mental health and addiction services. I think that is self-evidently the case. I can also welcome the additional funding over and above the 20 million for rehab for addressing the problem that I think the Ferret deserves some credit for persevering and profiling and highlighting around the impossible choice that some face between retaining their tenancy and accessing the treatment they need. That was wholly unacceptable, and again I welcome the government's acknowledgement of that and the funding provided for it. Can I also acknowledge Miles Briggs' reference to the work of Norman Stone? I think the neuroelectric therapy is one of those ideas that hopefully will now be given proper consideration as part of the strategy going forward. Obviously, as I said in the opening remarks, it's for the incoming government to identify and agree its agenda going forward. But a statement in favour of decriminalisation from the outgoing Parliament will now be difficult to ignore, particularly if it's adopted unanimously. Neil Findlay's right. Scotland's drugs death scandal is the shame of this Parliament since its inception in 1999. But the last 5 years have been particularly horrendous. Hopefully today's debate and vote can help ensure the next Parliament does so much better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Jenny Mara to close the debate for Labour and to make her closing speech of this Parliament.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This debate on drugs is long overdue. The reluctance of the SNP to debate drugs in their own parliamentary time, I think, tells its own story over the course of this Parliament. Not of malice or bad intent. I think more of a lack of ideas and analysis that might help the desperate situation that we have here in Scotland, the worst drugs deaths rate in the world. And it pains me to say it, because for the last 10 years I have attempted to speak on behalf of people in Dundee where the crisis is at its worst. People I went to school with are caught up in this cycle of despair. Classmates of the former Drugs Minister Joe Fitzpatrick the same. We are the age of that ageing cohort that the government speak of. Back in 2012, from those benches I spoke in a debate on the government's drugs strategy, The Road to Recovery. It was anything but. 8 years later, drugs deaths have more than doubled and recovery beds have almost gone. We have a drugs task force that is painfully slow. The Dundee Drugs Commission did its work in good faith and now seems to be gathering dust on the shelf. The frustrating thing is that those who did the work are clear that there is no silver bullet, but that all analysis points towards investment in community drug workers on the ground who support families and do the hard yards of walking alongside people who use drugs and supporting their recovery. But this is yet to happen. The path to drugs is wide and open. And when so many other paths are closed off to young people in Dundee and across Scotland, precious few jobs to go to, few of any standing or earning potential. The dream of having your own house for young people is distant. Holidays are for other people. We call it economic insecurity, and today I think we only see the dangerous surface of that iceberg, because COVID has created a catastrophe in the economy, and we will see that over the next few years. Do we brace ourselves and start to try policy that will stem this tide economically and create more hope for young people and alternative paths than drugs? Whoever forms the government in May, I sincerely hope that they will take our shame of drugs death so much more seriously than they have over my 10 years in this place. For this is my last speech in Holyrood, Presiding Officer, and people try to give this speech on a positive note. And I will do the same when I invoke the incredible people I have met on this journey, the women and men and children I have the honour to represent and stand alongside in their struggles. I will never forget the male lawyer who accused the women carers I represented of avarice in an equal pay negotiation, their dignity in the face of such entitlement and arrogance. The people in my surgery who I have listened to, talked with and sometimes cried with, their struggles, sometimes individual, sometimes emerging into campaigns. It has been a privilege to walk alongside each and every person. But neither can I forget the frustration of these last 10 years, when vast swathes of our time was taken up with the brutal debate of the independence referendum, as this drugs crisis wrapped its fingers around the throats of people in my community. I will never forget the intimidation as Anas Sarwar and I stood shoulder to shoulder in Dundee City Square, facing up Reform Street, as an army of kilts, drums and painted blue faces marched and shouted their way towards us. I felt I'd been transported back to a battle in 15th century Dundee, not a modern democracy. The silencing accusation of talking down Dundee, talking Scotland down, that phrase so cleverly designed to shut down debate, undermining democracy, being screamed and yelled at by Yes placard-carrying activists as I went door to door doing the democratic work of campaigning in my city. And I realise there is a mirror image to this, but that hard line of division, disruption and rancour, I think, is what prevents a better politics. And I do think, presiding officer, today I'm allowed to be honest, I think the hard edge of nationalism has worn some of us down for now. And I am glad that our party is presenting new energy and vitality for the next Parliament. And I hope that the next Parliament will realise the power of devolution, because there is so much that we can do now. I have learned over my 10 years here that the powers debate and where they lie is often empty and a distraction, and often on purpose. Because change comes about by harnessing collective will, leadership, teamwork and drive to make things happen. I started campaigning for a mental health crisis centre in Dundee over 3 years ago. Since then, 100 people in Dundee have lost their lives to suicide. The city has stalled and delayed, and this week we discovered that instead of using COVID as an excuse, like in Dundee, Perth opened its doors last June during the pandemic to a mental health crisis centre, showing that progress can be made. On drugs too, there is so much recommended in the Dundee Drugs Commission that could be actioned tomorrow. And when you begin to show change, power wielders in other places comply, and progress can be swift. And I think Peter Crikant is a powerful example of that. Have the argument about transfer of powers, and I don't think you get anywhere fast. The Scottish Labour amendment tonight reiterates our belief that police resources must continue to prevent supply. James Kelly spoke to that in his opening remarks. Our communities are awash with drugs. And I've recently heard of dealers baiting women through their letterboxes with free samples of heroin, women in recovery, until they succumb to the dealers. I asked the Chief Constable in the Audit Committee about the supply of drugs last month. And I felt he was maybe too willing to concede when he said, where the demand exists, the supply will operate. This is a day-to-day challenge for policing, I don't deny. But for parents trying to keep their children away from drugs, the ready availability, cheap prices that saturation supply creates and police acceptance of that, I don't think helps at all. Presiding officer, at the end of the day, I believe it's so often women who pick up the pieces of this drugs crisis, supporting their sons and daughters to make it to the next day, taking grandchildren into their own homes to raise when parents die, or are simply too caught up in the drug cycle to look after them. Raising children who have had heroin in their bloodstream since the womb and the resulting effects of that on the children themselves and the well-being of their grandparents looking after them. Women who resort to prostitution to buy drugs and feed their children. I often feel, and have said to many of them, that if the women of Dundee with lived experience of drugs in their families were asked to run our drug services, we might be looking at a completely different picture. And it is one reason that I have been proud to stand up for women, especially over these last couple of years. I come from a city with one of the highest rates of domestic violence. Women know that their lives are not gender neutral, and neither should be the laws that protect us. I would like to say the names of Benelyn Burke and her 2-year-old daughter, Jellica. Police have recovered 2 bodies in Dundee this afternoon. Presiding Officer, I am a great-granddaughter of women who worked in the jute mills, who bore the indignity of flaps in the back of their overalls to go to the toilet. Women know their lives are different from men's. Presiding Officer, I'd like to thank my lovely husband for his support. I'd like to thank my staff for all their work over the years, especially Roy O'Kane. And I'd like to thank my dad for giving me my politics, passed down to him from his grandfather, who founded the Jute and Flax Workers' Union in Dundee. I hope I have been able to give fair Labour representation to the descendants of his members and the people of North East Scotland. And thank you to the Labour Party for giving me the opportunity to serve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Mara. And I now call Brian Whittle.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer, and it is an honour to follow a speech like that by Jenny Mara. And I want to add my best wishes to Maureen Watt, Neil Findlay and Jenny Mara as they depart this place. They've been a credit to this chamber. And one thing I would like to say is that I don't think the general public quite understand the personal sacrifice that's required to be an elected member in here. And I know you will all be missed by this place and by colleagues across the chamber. The other thing I wanted to say in that is I wondered if Neil Findlay remembered one of the first conversations that him and I ever had. It was during at the start of the parliamentary versus media golf match, and he said to me, big man, here, come here, big man, let me give you a wee bit of advice. He says, see you in the chamber, see if I give you a wee bit of jip in that. And I shout, don't worry about it, we can be pals outside the chamber. And I said to him, 30 years of after dinner speaking, Mr Findlay, if you give me any jip, you're going to get it smacked right back in your face. I then, of course, took him out and gave him a lesson on the golf course. I know you can't intervene in that, it's not a point of order. But I wish the three of you all the best going forward. And I'm very grateful for this opportunity to close this debate on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives. And although we don't necessarily agree with every point that's in the amendments to the motion, we do need to move this debate on. So at decision time, we will be supporting all the motions. Although I have to say, a tinge of regret that the Greens have found a way not to support the Conservative motion, my motion, because nothing I think that we've put forward in the motion in any way stigmatises anyone in addiction. Now, I've listened to the contributions from across this chamber this afternoon, mostly from the same people who have been speaking in this issue for the past 5 years. They have consistently called for the Scottish Government to take on a crisis that has been growing over decades. We've heard how drug deaths have doubled in the last decade, to a point where Scotland has the worst drug deaths per head of population in the developed world, over 3 times that of the rest of the United Kingdom. In every debate that we have rehearsed repeatedly in this chamber, the Scottish Government have never managed to answer that one question, that really important question. Why is Scotland so much worse than everywhere else? Or linked to that, why is Scotland a higher death rate among the homeless community? And we need to know the answer to that. We need to explore that to develop an effective strategy. And over the 5 years, I've listened to SNP MSPs saying that they needed more powers, and I think that's a complete cop-out. The Scottish Government have got a huge range of powers that they could deploy, but have consistently refused to. And I think hiding behind that constitutional nonsense, preferring to use their time and energy to cast blame elsewhere instead of taking responsibility. And I don't think we can hide from that fact just because now the Scottish Government have decided to take action. I will take an intervention.
Stuart McMillan.
I thank Brian Whittle for taking the intervention. I think certainly in this debate and also the previous debate that took place on the issue of drugs, the vast majority of contributions did not play upon the constitutional issue, focused on what we need to do, irrespective as to a constitutional issue. And I would hope that Mr Whittle will have picked up on that from the vast majority of the contributions from the SNP benches today.
I thank Stuart McMillan for his intervention. He's right, of course, in this debate, But you can't sweep it under the table that the last 5 years, you've refused to do it. That is just a fact. I mean, what I will say is the Minister herself said during a question session with the Health and Sport Committee that it will require the deployment of resource from both the health and education portfolios to effectively tackle this crisis, not just the extra £20 million of funding. And she is absolutely correct. And both portfolios are totally devolved to the Scottish Government. However, one of my main issues here is that Scotland remains the unhealthiest country in Europe, as it was at the start of this parliamentary term. Scotland gave the world the modern education system, but Scottish education, once the envy of the world, has been mismanaged by this government, and we've slipped down the international tables, letting down both pupils and teachers, without closing the attainment gap and increasing inequality. But education is going to be one of the main drivers in tackling this crisis. What we should have been doing, actually, is what's now coming forward. I mean, the Scottish Conservatives have called for the reintroduction of rehabilitation beds for years after they were decimated by this government. Why is it only now the Scottish Government want to reverse their cuts after all these years? And one of my big issues is, given the drug use issues in our jails, how about changing the daft process of releasing prisoners on a Friday afternoon when they cannot access services till a Monday, often placing them in areas where drug use is rife? While we're at it, introduce a step-down programme from prisons into society. It costs £40,000 to keep a prisoner in jail. That is why getting reoffending down is so important, the ultimate spend to save. What about increasing the needle exchange programme to tackle HIV and hepatitis C, reversing the upward trend after these programmes have been cut? And ensuring that the third sector, who will be absolutely crucial in tackling the drug death crisis, is properly funded. And I was glad to hear the Minister talking about a fund specifically for the third sector. And family support for those grieving for losing somebody to addiction. And I heard I've said this before in this chamber, a police officer said to me, used a term called a hierarchy of death, and how those who are grieving for a lost one, how they're viewed depending on what is on the death certificate. That is stigma. Now, I've been particularly interested in the link between deprivation and addiction, and joined the Westminster Scottish Affairs Committee investigation into Scotland's drug problem, along with other colleagues from the Health and Sport Committee. Their report said, and I quote, deprivation itself is not a direct cause of addiction. The links between poverty and drugs misuse are complex. The main mechanisms that are described as credible links between deprivation and problem drug use are weak family bonds, physiological discomfort and personal distress, including ACEs, which have been mentioned today, and long-term distress, low employment opportunities, few community resources. Once someone has a drugs problem, they also are more limited in their means to escape poverty. The chances of obtaining paid employment is also much reduced. Having a criminal record, a lack of an employment history, and the stigma of having or having had a substance problem all play a part in this. So it stands to reason that resources should be allocated prior to addiction. This has to be the most cost-effective investment. Simply put, if there are fewer community resources in these areas, then develop those resources to fit the communities. Long-term policy on prevention is required, and that is about access to opportunities to participate in our communities, the chance to be passionate about something in a group who have the same passion. One thing is for sure, if we don't give our children a gang to belong to, they will find their own gang. Now, I say that I have the absolute greatest respect for Angela Constance and her knowledge in this issue, not to mention, I think, her unwitting commitment to tackle this crisis. But the question has to be, why is it taking the Scottish Government this length of time to act? Why now, at the end of a parliamentary term, just before an election? Why not 5 years ago, at the start of this parliamentary term, when this Parliament could have delivered the real change that the sector has been pleading for? In a few weeks' time, a new parliamentary term will begin with many new MSPs. Some of us will not be here, and the reset button will be hit once again. The next session of Parliament, with its new cohort of MSPs, will have to start the process of dealing with this crisis all over again. And unfortunately, it's obvious that the Constitution will once again dominate the election. All the while, there are those in our society who have been most marginalised, whose voices are seldom heard, who desperately need our help, and who are continually overlooked and let down by this place. Quite frankly, that is this Parliament's shame, and more specifically the SNP government shame, whose actions are too little and far too late, because next year's drug death figures post-pandemic is going to be very grim reading indeed.
Can you please move to a conclusion?
I'm just coming to a conclusion, Deputy Presiding Officer. If this happens to be the last time I speak in this place, I would say that it has been undoubtedly the privilege of my life to serve, and I've never forgotten why we're here and the responsibility we carry. It has also been the most frustrating place to be, because I look over the last 5 years, I think what could have been achieved. Yes, the Scottish Government's investment in drug death crisis is welcome. Of course it is. But it is way too late for this session of Parliament to work with. And the cynic in me has to wonder why now, just before an election. Quite frankly, Presiding Officer, Scotland deserves better. Too many of our most vulnerable have been failed, and I hope the next government will be prepared to take responsibility for the inactions of this government and finally give a voice to those who are most desperately in need. Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, and I now call on Angela Constance to wind up the debate.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I have very much appreciated the contributions from all members this afternoon, and in particular from those who are planning to leave Parliament and have made their final speeches today. Jenny Mara, of course, is an old sparring partner of mine from our portfolio days in youth employment. And she's spoken a lot about the tension and stresses between fulfilling our obligations to our families and to our obligations as elected politicians. And that's always been something that has resonated with me, because it was only months after being elected to this place in 2007 that my own son was born, and I have never let Bruce Crawford forget, because he was the Minister for Parliament, about the lack of pairing arrangements. That's perhaps a reflection across the political parties of the time, that there was no pairing arrangements, and I had to come in here and vote the week after my son was born. And of course I appreciate Jenny Mara's campaign and her particular remarks with respect to women in politics, and indeed how the lives and views of women should be shaping our public services. And if I go from one woman to another, I would like to pay tribute to my friend and colleague, Maureen Watt. Maureen has been an MSP in this place since 2006, and over her 15 years, she has served as a schools minister, Minister for Public Health, and as Minister for Mental Health. And I have always appreciated Maureen Watt's down-to-earth, north-east, matter-of-fact approach to life, and she was always a go-to source for good, practical, but also very honest advice. And I'm glad Miles Briggs recognised that Maureen comes from a long line of nationalists. It's not just the Ewings, you know, that have good lineage. And if I go from my old friend Maureen Watt to my old foe Neil Findlay, what can I say? To be frank, sometimes Neil Findlay has really ripped my knitting. But also, if I'm honest, he has sometimes given an absolute belter of a speech, and I think today was an example of that. So I do genuinely wish him well. I wish his brave wife Fiona well, and of course his dear mother, who is a constituent of mine. And I know that in his approach to things, Neil will often try and characterise ministers in a particular way, but he, of course, knows that I grew up in a village not that far away from the village that he grew up in, and that I grew up in a tin house in Addy Brown Hill. And the things that shape me, the things that I carry with me day in, day out, is my time as a prison social worker, knowing that while prison at times is absolutely necessary, that it rarely works. And I've also seen the impact on frontline staff, including prison staff, of what happens when people take their own lives, either in the community or in institutions. And the first person I ever detained under the Mental Health Act as a newly qualified mental health officer working at the State Hospital at Carstairs was a young woman with severe mental health issues, a huge drug-taking history, who had lost her child and then went on despite all of my interventions, to commit suicide. And it's those experiences that shape me and will shape my approach as I go forward in this position. I am political to my core. I am that blue-faced gnat, but it is the real life that will always shape me. And of course, we will debate the connections between our political aspirations and our political views and the impact that that does and does not have in real life. I am pleased to say that we will accept the Liberal Democrat motion because of the recognition of the importance of heroin-assisted treatment and the need to roll that out further, and also taking on board what more we need to do in terms of diversion. I will, in the spirit of consensus, also accept the Labour motion. Again, you know, we are supportive of overdose prevention facilities. But I would add just two things to the Labour amendment. It is the role of the police and all of us to work to reduce not just the supply of drugs, but to reduce the demand of drugs. And it is really important that in our justice system that we can have services such as those peer navigators, you know, Kevin Neary from Aid and Abet, who I've met, who can support people the first time that they come into contact with the Justice Service, and who can perhaps help people on that road out of the Justice Service and into treatment and support. The other point I would want to make is about funding. I would never demur from the importance of funding. I have, after all, secured an additional £5 million for this financial year and an additional £250 million over the next 5 years. But we should reflect on the fact that since 2008, this government has invested over £1 billion in drug and alcohol services. And that's before you include Housing First, mental health and specific projects currently funded by the Justice portfolio. But the bigger point I want to make is that inputs don't always equal outputs. And tackling drug-related deaths is not a two-dimensional issue. And there are fundamental questions about who we fund and how we fund people and for what. And going forward, we do need to reshape services. We do need to rebalance both support and accountability. We do need to absolutely listen to those warning signs when people are admitted to hospitals and get them into treatment fast. And I want to ensure more parity, more genuine partnership between statutory services and the third sector. I want to see... Yes?
Neil Findlay.
Opportunity to rip your knitting again for a wee while. Can the Minister tell us in what other area of social policy an ageing cohort is described as people over 35 years of age?
Angela Constance.
Well, I can't think of any other cohort. And what I would say to Mr Findlay, while there are absolute issues for people who are 35 or 45 who have had very long history of taking drugs, that has an enormous impact on their physical and their mental health, which means that they may not be as healthy or as fit as people like you and I, who are over 50. But what I will also say about the drug-related deaths is we are seeing a rise in the number of young people dying over the past 2 years, and we need to nip that in the bud. And we are also seeing a disproportionate increase in the number of women that are dying as well. So as I used to say to Jenny Mara in my youth employment days, we can look at the headlines, but we always need to scratch beneath the headlines and scratch beneath the statistics to really understand what is happening. But I'm determined to see better embedded mental health and addiction services. I want to see NHS prescribers out there in the community, in outreach services and in the third sector. And I'm determined that we will listen to both lived and living experience, and that they will be absolutely plugged in to the national mission, and that the national collaborative will be working in partnership with the national mission. And I want to deliver residential services that are located in and connected with community services and connected with families. And crucially, we need a balanced ticket between harm reduction and recovery. This isn't one or t'other. And that's why, with regret, I'm not going to support the Conservative amendment tonight because, and particularly having listened to some of the contributions, that it's that balanced ticket that is absent. Because if you, like me, really believe in person-centred care, you will not predetermine what treatment someone should or should not have, or indeed for how long they should get that treatment, because every person deserves the right treatment for them at the right time, whether or not that's abstinence-based recovery in residential rehab or whether it's immediate access to an opioid substitute therapy treatment. Yes.
Brian Whittle.
Grateful for the Minister giving me. That is exactly the essence of the motion, to make sure that we're not pre-prescribing what they have. We need to open up the options that are available. That is exactly what our motion is all about, surely.
Minister.
Well, Presiding Officer, I could probably have just about accepted the Conservative motion on the basis that if this government can listen to campaigners, lived experience recovery organisations, and indeed this Parliament to make a long-term commitment to residential rehab, £100 million over the next 5 years, surely it could not have been without the expectation for the Conservatives also to be bold to clearly say that they support heroin-assisted treatment, that they support overdose prevention facilities, that they will work with us to persuade the UK Government to introduce drug checking facilities, that they will work with us over the regulation of pill presses, because I'm going to really stretch the patience of the presiding officer here, because Brian Whittle asked, what is so different about Scotland? Well, there are 3 or 4 things that are different about Scotland. I'll tell you this, we don't have enough folk in treatment, that's number 1. We also have more people proportionate in our population that use drugs. And we have a different level of concentration of poverty in part of the country. But we have a more acute problem with benzodiazepines. And in comparison to 2009, there is a 450% increase in the implication of benzodiazepines in drug-related deaths in Scotland. South of the border, that's a 50% increase. So it is not unreasonable for us to expect our colleagues across the chamber to stand with us side by side and ask and demand pill press regulations, bearing in mind people with these presses can produce 500,000 tablets in little over an hour and pollute our streets with drugs that cost pennies. I'm very conscious of time, Presiding Officer, and my apologies to Jenny Marra. Presiding Officer, our core aim is to get more people into treatment to save lives, and we have to ensure that our work, our emergency work, is absolutely embedded with our work to improve lives, and our services need to stick with people, and there should be no running out of chances. And the debate that we are having today is not unconnected to the debate that we had a few days ago about children's rights, the debate we had a few weeks ago when we passed legislation on the financial redress for survivors is not unconnected to this debate either. And I want to ensure that the work we do in drugs policy is joined at the hip with mental health, with housing, with homelessness, with adverse childhood experiences work, justice and, of course, poverty and inequality. And none of us should forget the impact of poverty and inequality. Presiding Officer, I am determined to build a consensus. We will, of course, have robust debate. We don't all need to agree all the time. It is good that we see the mountain from different perspectives and different sides, but we do need to march forward together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. We will now move on to the next item of business. The next item